Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of Rainbow Conversations with me, Richard Dunbar, a new radical queer podcast telling the inspiring stories and hearing about the inspiring lives of the queer community the world over. And today is the second part of LGBTQ plus History Month special. And in this episode, we will talk to two amazing individuals. And first of all, we will speak to Xavier de Souza, who's an independent performance maker and culture worker based between England and Portugal. And in the Rainbow Spotlight this week, we will speak to Tom Doyle, who is the CEO of Yorkshire-based MESMAC, one of the oldest and largest sexual health organisations in the country. Let's do this, people.
Hi, I'm Xavier de Souza, but my friends call me Xav. I am a performance maker and cultural worker, and as well as doing my own shows, I curate and produce Performing Borders, research and performance platform for migrants working on the theme of borders, and the New Quiz on the Block program, which also happens here in Bradford.
Yay! Will you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of what is New Queers on the Block? For those who are listening who might not have heard of it, what is it and why is it so important?
So New Queers on the Block started as about four or 5 years ago as a touring program. So it's produced by the Marble Productions, which is a Brighton-based company. And at the time, it was this proposal to bring queer artists who doing, experimental work, so not very mainstream work, to regions of the country and to venues who didn't have that kind of programming yet, for us to break ground a little bit. Because I think for us, it was always like the live art specifically and experimental kind of performance sector of the cultural sector. Was always kind of based in like the big cities like London, a little bit of Manchester, a little bit of Brighton, but not much outside of those, So, but we knew that there was artists and that there was communities in those places. So it started off as a traveling band of artists that we love, and we kind of took them across the country. Bradford being one of the places. Then we also went to Blackpool, Hastings, and Folkestone. As well as a couple of others in between. But those were the main kind of areas. And then the reason, so it was quite popular in the places that we went to the first time. But when we kind of arrived, we understood that there was sort of this understanding from the local communities and from us as well, that we were arriving in these places kind of, a little bit like, oh, we're the queers from London. And that didn't really sit well with us and didn't really, and we kind of start to have conversations with people in these regions, including yourself, and started to understand that actually what will be interesting here is actually there's thriving queer communities in these places. There's thriving queer artists here. There just aren't that many opportunities yet at the time. Now there are a bit more, which is great. But there aren't many opportunities yet for queer artists, specifically queer artists who sit on a sort of intersection of identities. So queer artists who also are people of color or migrants or working class or disabled people. And they are not necessarily doing work about that, but that's part of their identity, you know what I mean? So we've changed the program a lot, and it's been changing a lot since we've done it, but we've kind of decided to take a different approach, which was like, actually, what do these regions need, actually? And what do these communities need, rather than just us coming over once or twice a year? And the answers were, we need you to be more here, more embedded, and to provide more opportunities and better opportunities than just a one-off every now and then to go and see a show. So actually, we started to work with local people. So the lovely Sonia Sandhu, and
we love her.
We love her. Shout out to Sonia and yourself and the Brickbox ladies and Bread and Roses, Speakers Corner here in Bradford and in other locations, other people who were already kind of operating in the region and understood the region much better than we did, obviously. But we started to kind of make partnerships and kind of put money and resources and platforms in the region so that artists and producers and communities could benefit from those better than just watching a show once every now and then, you know. So that's kind of where New Boys on the Block is at the moment. We've just launched a new season, well, not season, a new announcement, so it's going to start again next year, so 2022, and this time is going to be less about kind of making shows, but more about kind of commissioning artists to spend like 6 months across our network and kind of creating their own practice, developing their own practice, their own ideas, with producing support from us and traveling in accommodation paid for and large grants, so that they don't have, like, it's like they have their own kind of salary for 6 months, so that they can just focus on that, on their own development. And that was really important for us because like the cultural sector functions so much as a sort of a capitalist endeavor, you know. Everything is product driven. If you get a commission, like you usually have to provide like a show at the end of it, you know what I mean? And you have like 2 weeks to do it, and with no producing support, and the commission is like $1,000, if that. And it's like that's unworkable, actually, and that doesn't allow artists to be artists, to create at their own pace, and to experiment, and to also to fail. That's what we found. It's like there's no opportunity for you to fail other than when you're in front of an audience, and then a lot of times that just marks you as someone who did that bad performance. And it's like, yeah, of course you did that bad performance. You had 2 weeks to prepare for it. Come on, like, you know, like if you look at artist practices, it takes years for you to develop. It takes months for you to develop a show. Like my last show, for instance, it took me like 18 months for me to get to a point where I was like, oh yeah, this is the show. You know what I mean? Like, but by then I had performed in front of so many people. I'm like, oh, poor those people. You know what I mean? They just saw something that I wasn't particularly proud of. But all the artists have been asking this, not just directly to us, but across the sector. Everyone's been kind of asking for better systems of sustainability and better opportunities for them to grow as artists, not just to show work. So this is kind of what we've been doing, and what we're looking at the moment is artists who are looking for that kind of opportunity, so that they can embed themselves within our network and grow at their own pace. At the same time, we'll also have some smaller grants for other artists who still want to make a show, and you know that's fine as well. And yeah,
I think that's really important, because one thing we've noticed in Bradford, and actually speaking to friends across the UK, actually, one thing what's really missing in the arts and cultural world is that ability to produce and develop your own practice. That's really in Bradford, where, as you know, you look at the DIY culture we've got in terms of creating stuff that's always been there, always will be. Then you've got the sort of high-end venues who receive like big shows and all that lot. But the thing we're missing in this district, actually in other areas of the country, working class folk actually, is that ability to be able to say, okay, yeah, I'm interested in writing, I'm interested in set design, I'm interested in acting. But people can't do that because, like you say, they're chasing the next commission or whatever, you know.
Exactly. So. Like, and by the time you get your commission, you then go into a studio where you are rehearsing and making, but then you're already thinking about, what am I going to do next month when this money runs out? Like, how am I going to pay my rent? That's not sustainable. You know what I mean? And that actually affects the ability for you to make work that you're proud of and work that is, you know, I'm not saying that it lacks quality. That's not the right way of saying it. But it's like it just forces you to do a product rather than necessarily for you to grow as an artist. And I think you're right in terms of like as a working class person, like that's one of the biggest barriers to the sector is the lack of sustainability in the sector. And this sort of like short commission kind of frameworks that we have, there's space for that as well. There should be space for that as well, of course, but it shouldn't be the main modus operandi of venues and festivals and the cultural sector as a whole. But unfortunately it is. I was talking with Chris Nelson, the great Chris Nelson, who runs Lift Festival in London, and he was saying like there's a big lack of provision of laboratory kind of spaces where artists can just be artists and experiment because everything is product driven, you know. So that is another barrier, not just for working class people, but also for queer people and for migrants, for instance. Like no migrant can come from outside, and no international people can come work in the UK on a £2,000 commission. That's just not going to be viable for their visas. You know what I mean? So the provision of, you know, talent, international talent, and for people, young artists, to be able to travel is incredibly limited in the UK. I was just outside in Portugal making a show there, and it's so apparent how little UK artists travel into the continent or elsewhere in the world. Really, there's not a lot of crossover, which is wild. Obviously, now with Brexit is a different kind of context, but even before Brexit, like there was very little crossover because there's not a lot of provision for artists to just travel and experiment with others. You know what I mean? So, I mean, we're not tackling everything, but that's kind of where our thinking came from New Kids on the Block. Is like, what is New Kids on the Block, and how can it provide a kind of a broader package of support for artists that embeds them better in themselves and their own practice. It doesn't have to be just artists, by the way. It can be collectives as well. Who we're very excited to work with, hopefully. Let's see. I think like Bradford has been such a rich kind of space for us in many ways, because we've kind of grown with you guys in a way since we came here, and it's been really lovely to kind of just collaborate and genuinely collaborate. You know, it's not just a transaction thing that happens in a lot of other places. But I'm not naming names. But
come on, we should have done this over wine, then maybe they got some answers out of you.
No. Actually, everyone in the New Kids on the Block network is really lovely, and actually it is. But I think we chose people well. But there's I think there's quite of a. I'm not just like licking your ass here. Like it's a lovely context, Bradford. It really is, because I think that there's a strong sense of community here and a strong sense of diversity here that makes us feel really at home, you know.
And actually, on that, and again, in terms of what you individually and what New Quiz on the Block have done, actually, when I sort of first met you, when you did that queer weekend here in this amazing institution in Bradford, people in a place called Theatre in the Mill. If you've not been, you need to come and see shows here. They produce great shit here.
They do.
You know, good shit, if you know what I'm saying. So basically what I saw on that weekend and what really opened my eyes is you'd thought about every last detail. So it was a space for queers to come, which is so important. But then when I walked through the doors and saw those performances that weekend, how important intersectionality was to you, because in terms of the representation of the performers, but also the audience and how welcome people were. Then when we had the after party, from what I remember of it, at the Brick Box Bar. But actually, what that was, I still got one of the photos from that. And actually, that was one of the best sort of weekends I've had as a queer in years, because actually it was amazing, because everybody, it was like, oh my God, it's so diverse, and you know, it was brilliant. So thank you to you for that, actually, because we've grown and developed and been agitated in our thinking in terms of what we produce here, actually. So thanks for that.
That's very lovely to say. I don't think I don't think we've been able to do any of that without like, you know, the amazing people that are Sonia and Rosie and everyone at the Breakbox rooms. Breakbox ladies now.
Yeah.
They're not in that space anymore, are they? I know.
I loved it.
I know.
Bring it back,
I know.
Rosie,
Let's recreate the good times.
Yeah.
No, but it was. I agree. I agree that it's been a really lovely experience and has allowed us to kind of do a lot. And when I mean us, I mean like everyone that's been part of that experience. For me, I think it's been really fruitful and energizing. Yeah, because it's. I think like it's very different here than it is, for instance, in Blackpool or in Hastings, where conversations about queerness are so not yet there. For instance, like our work in Blackpool has been mostly about kind of breaking ground, even in like the conversation around the word queer. You know, so many people in Blackpool were feeling offended by us even having queer in our title. And we're like, wow, okay, so this is a different kind of contextualization that we need to have there. And I'm not saying that it's better or worse, it's just that it's a very different kind of acceptability here. And I'm very thankful for that.
I think, and on that, I think that word queer, I've had that conversation with loads of people recently in the past couple of years. And personally, as an individual, I struggled, and I would say until a year or so ago with that word, because I'm like, why have I struggled with that word? Why don't I like it? Then you think to when you were growing up, when I was this closeted little queer kid, and when that word was used in a negative context, how have you seen him queer on telly? You know, all that. And I never really thought about that. And actually, it's about reclamation. And it's like, I'm having this. And I think particularly younger people, because I'm pushing 40. Clearly, I don't look at people, but, you know, it's young people saying, no, this is who we are. It's a lifestyle, it's a culture, it's what we think, it's what we believe. So I think that's quite powerful. But one thing what really gets me about you and what really interests me is when the work you produce, the issues you speak on, even in the short time you talked about your work with migrants, making sure the queer community is more accepting, you know, you stand against capitalism and the damage it does to society. That just for a person's interests and beliefs and the values, it really interests me where that comes from and what it was influenced by. Was it a particular moment? Was it when you were growing up? What was it like that makes you the socialist, communist, Marxist that you are?
Do you know what? I'm going to tell you a story that I don't remember this, but my mum tells this story all the time, and I think it says a lot. So when I was 7 years old, I grew up in a very small town in rural Portugal, and it was a very deeply Catholic kind of village, and now it's a bit different, but back then it was really, you know, every Sunday everyone would go all the families would go dressed up to the nines to the church to see the sermon and the mass service. That's what you call it in England. And my mum was a single mom with 2 kids. I was the youngest, and my mum was never really that religious at the time. And she never used to take us. And my sister used to cry every Sunday because she was like, "What am I going to take my friends tomorrow?" Because, you know, if you're a kid, you go to church on Sunday morning and then you gossip and all that. And then on Monday morning, you'll talk about it at school. And so my sister was always pissed off about it. And then my sister started to like run away right in the morning on Sunday mornings to go mass on her own. And so my mum one Sunday was like, "We're going to go as a family then to support your sister." And that's fine. And then, so we went, and then according to my mom, I just wouldn't shut up. And I kind of was like, "What's going on? What's happening? Why is everyone here? What's these things on the wall?" kind of thing. My mom was telling me the whole story of the Bible and Jesus and what they did to Jesus and all that. And I was like, "That's really unfair, unjust." So I just kept like ranting about it and the whole thing. And then people started to shush me. And then, and And they started to shush me. My mum was like, right, so the mass is going to start now, so you're going to have to be quiet. And I was like, no, this is unfair. And then eventually the priest comes in, right, and everyone like sits down and goes quiet. And then you have to, like, and he's like, starts his sermon. And I kept talking, and people started to shush me really loudly. So I stood up and I went, excuse me, if I'm not allowed to speak, why is that man over there speaking? And I just wouldn't shut up, apparently. So then I got barred.
Barred from church at 7 years old, people. The rebellion started at that age and it's not stopped since.
I think it comes from that. I think so it's not my, I think when it comes to activism, I am very kind of socially conscious of my privilege, but also that as a queer migrant person, for instance, in this country, I have some privileges, and then some other privileges have just been removed because of Brexit and nationalism and ongoing walking into fascism. But let's not go there now.
But go anywhere you want.
No, it's just that, but I mean, I don't think that's an exaggeration.
No, I agree.
I'm very acutely aware that there is still a lot of work to do. So, and I don't like, I think it's our job as people who live in society and community to look around and kind of go, well, this is unfair. You know what I mean? Like, if there's an unfair situation, I usually try to say something about it or do something about it. Also because I think there's as a white cis man, like, I think there are privileges that other people don't have or don't feel comfortable kind of using. And I don't care, I'll just say it. But in an arts perspective, I think there is art is but an expression of what goes on in one's mind, right? And so it's an expression of what you see in the world and what you want to say and how you want to express yourself in the world in many different ways. So things come naturally about kind of political content or kind of personal content come naturally from that. But in terms of my activism, I think I quite like them put separately, but I think they merge a lot, actually. I like to think of them separately, but I do understand that there's a world beyond me that kind of comes with their own baggage. So for instance, there was a show that I did a few years ago in here that was called Posts, and I was traveling all the round with it, which is great. But then I started to become acutely aware that people were like, oh, this show is about Brexit. It's like, it's really not. Like, it's really nothing to do with Brexit. But that's what people come with in their minds, because that's what's happening contextually. And one thing that I love to do, sorry, I know this is a really rambly answer, but one thing I love to do is always work contextually. And I think New Girls on the Block also kind of put me in that kind of trajectory. But when you work contextually, means that you often work with local communities and local histories and local foods and smells and things like that, right? And what that allows to do is for people to also bring to the table their own baggage. And I enjoy that a lot, because I think art is also a meeting point between people. So for me, like, I don't know whether, I think that all of it comes from my experiences as a child, of being in this like super Catholic and restrictive kind of environment. Yeah, for sure. I have no doubts about that. But sorry.
No, it's just interesting. So we've got the rebellious 7-year-old Xav. Then we've got now this really successful intersectional activist producer that you are now, very well respected in your field in terms of what you do. It just interests me how you got to that point. So you're this 7-year-old child, and it's like, how did you get to that point where you realised art is a form in which you can express your views and the people you work with views? How did you get to that point?
I very privileged. So in the village, every summer there was a arts festival, and my mum was part of the arts festival. And funnily enough, it was the only time in the village where there was a little bit of like a different perspective in the world. So because my mum was part of that organization, a lot of artists just stay with us. And so I grew up kind of, I was very privileged. My mum was very like you have to accept the world. You have to accept everyone. It was a different story when I actually came out, but I think actually that gave me a really good foundation of kind of understanding that that the world was beyond me, and that art was also kind of a mode of self-expression. I mean, I think that's the most valuable thing I've learned from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So that's why, and I think I didn't know I wanted to be an artist until much later. Actually, I knew that I enjoyed being a part of artists' kind of spaces and communities and people, and having conversations about art and enjoying art, and I knew that, but I didn't know until I finished university really what I wanted to do, and I started to experiment and things like that.
How, growing up in rural Portugal, how was that experience for you? And were you quite young when you came out? And how did, you've alluded to some of it, how did friends and family sort of react and respond?
So I think, like everyone else, I was a bit bullied at school for having like longer hair, for instance. But I didn't, like when I was like 9, but I didn't really get like violently bullied. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think, I knew very well that it would be very dangerous for me to come out publicly or to assume something publicly.
What do you mean by dangerous?
I mean, literally get my head kicked in, or bring shame to my family. And in fact, I didn't really, until like way into my 20s, online, I was also a little bit careful about what I would put up there, because I would be kind of like, my mum's still in the village and who knows what's going to happen to her. I mean, it is a strange one, because also like I know that I was quite afraid of coming out to my parents and to my family, because I knew that it was going to be a difficult conversation. I wasn't expecting it to be as hard as it was, because my mum had this kind of, super liberal approach of like, everyone together, and you need to respect everyone's identities and cultural views and cultural backgrounds and views and stuff like that. And then when I came out, it was kind of like, I mean, we drove into this like field, and then she just broke down crying, telling me like, what did I do wrong, blah blah blah, herself, like what she had done wrong. And then she was kind of trying to like find my boyfriend at the time and to have a serious parent conversation with him, and I was like, get off, like what the fuck. And that was strange, because it felt very much like, hang on, not a betrayal, but it was sort of like but you told me that this was fine, but why is it not fine when I do it, just when your friends do it? And it took a long time, I think, to really accept that, but I understood that was to do with shame. And now I look back and I understand that's to do with her fear for my safety, but also shame of what she might have done, and I think that's a big wake-up call, I think, of how societies, and obviously I didn't grow up here, but like societies in rural Portugal like that's so deeply Catholic, like they have so much control over one another, and part of that control comes with building shame into their relationships, or kind of holding someone accountable through a shameful way, or it's not a shameful way, that's not the right way of saying it, but you know what I mean, like kind of shaming someone into submission. I think that there's also like this kind of understanding at the time, because she was a single mom, pretty much one of the only single moms in the village, if not the only at the time. No, not the only. That she was deviant already anyway. So for her to have a gay child at the time, or potentially a gay child, was a big thing. You know, what would people say? What would people do? And we lived in a really like rundown house, you know, like it was very easy to like break in if people wanted to. So I think there was a lot of elements of scaredness into it.
That's really interesting, and I think that shows the mark of the man you are, because straight away in that you were thinking about your mum and why she might have been thinking like that, and I think that's quite admirable. But talking about the impact of shame, it's something I think we should talk about more in our community. Actually, and about its impact. Would you say that in terms of that shame, what you carried with you from coming out at an early age, does that still have an impact on your life now, or do you think you've come to terms with handling it? Or
no, I don't think I have. I think I've come to terms with aspects of it. I think unfortunately I grew up in a generation and in a context that was built in, not just to do with my queerness, but with other parts of my identity and my background. So you know, I think I do recognize some traits sometimes, actually, and my therapist has a field day every now and then on that. But I think that there have been times where I've stopped, or that I've not just stopped doing things that I wanted to do, but also kind of expressed myself in different, or wearing things that I wanted to wear, or because of shame. And I always felt awful about it. And it's something that I'm still trying to overcome. And it's not easy. It's not every day that I can do that. That has affected me on personal levels and personal relationships, with friends and past partners. Definitely, I think that there's been conflict of shame in relationships before as well. So what each other kind of expect of one another, that was actually to do with understanding of what we might look like together. Shame is a fucker, isn't it? Because then, like, you have the contextual shame of where you grew up, and, you know, religious shame and gender-based shame and sexual shame, but also then you have the other stuff like, this person and I'm not compatible. It's like, what the fuck does that mean? And actually then start to understand that a lot of it comes from societal pressures, that it's so inbuilt. I mean, you know, in this fucking sector, in the community, there's so much shame attached to like how people look, how people dress, how people, like, what their cultural backgrounds are, how their race, and how their, you know, their migration status and all that. And it's like, it's really endemic in ways that I think are quite unique to the queer community, you know, or to the actually, let me phrase that. They're quite unique to gay community. I think in queer community, there is also a uniqueness to it, and it's also endemic. But there's more subversion of it, or more of an attempt to subvert in it. The gay community is more kind of embedded in it in a way that I think is not really resolved, or anywhere near being resolved. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, you know, it does. It does. Thank you, because that's quite deep and personal. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me. Sort of look at rounding off, but it's an important question. Something I'm going to ask pretty much every person I'm speaking to, and it's like, what do you think if you had to pick one or two issues facing the queer community as a whole are now? What are the key issues, and what can people listening to this, whether you're a member of the queer community or whether you're an ally or whether you're something else in between? So what are the key issues and what can people do to tackle those? What springs to mind for you? Issues facing the queer community.
Fucking hell, where do I start?
If you had to, what
how many hours do we have?
This could be a series. Richard and Dav, there we go. This is a show in itself.
Let's do an offshoot season.
Yeah, sure.
It's a very good question. I don't think I have a final answer to that, but the one that kind of springs to mind that is really in my mind at the moment is inequality, because I think inequality in a very intersectional way. So the more people are equal in terms of the rights that they have, but also the access to tools to live a happy, kind of sustainable life, then the less competition there is, and the less people fight with one another, because they don't, you know what I mean? There's no need to like kind of go like, oh, I need to protect my things. Like, no, you don't, because if everyone is equal, then you don't have that, or you have less of that, right? And the moment you loosen that, I was trying to remember who the fucking philosopher was at the moment, but I can't remember the name. But there was this like, there's this understanding that's like, if you do remove barriers to people to access the tools to kind of, live their lives in a healthy way, that in the way that they want to, they feel respected, then there's less side eye, there's less shame attached to it, because people don't have the impetus to have to prove themselves to do something. So in a way, I think inequality is a big issue, and I would say is the fundamental issue. Not just of our time, but of ever, right? Like if you look at the gay community and the queer community specifically, and currently the trans community, fucking always solidarity with the trans community. The biggest issues of our times are about fundamental access to rights and dignity in the public sphere. And that comes with inequality as well. You know what I mean? Like, for me, that's the biggest part of it. I think that what we can do, I have no fucking clue how to start. There's so much we have to do. The first thing is to like have solidarity with one another, and also like obviously fucking email your MPs, like go and be politically active if you can, if you have the capacity or the confidence to do that, because it's really important that we don't just kind of seclude ourselves into this kind of like, we're being oppressed. It's like, yes, we are, so then we need to do something about it. And it's not just about every now and then sending a few tweets, or going to a demonstration every now and then. Actually that solidarity needs to start on a daily basis. And I would complement that with the fact that the onus can't just be on the individual. Yeah. So it's not just about us doing, acts of solidarity every day or changing the ways that we kind of do things. It's also about collectively us trying to change the systems that are in place that keeps us apart, really. And that comes with participation in the public sphere and participation in local politics, as well as national politics, and of course you can do that with your shirt off as well. You know what I mean? Like what we were talking about earlier. But that also needs to be complemented with not individualistic action, but collective action.
I think that solidarity, collective action, that's what it's about. That's socialism versus capitalism right there.
Yeah. If you want to take it to that point, like, inequality is a product of capitalism, of course, you know what I mean? But like, if we have to also think beyond that, you know, like we have to also think on a grassroots level, what are the structures locally that prevent people to participating in democracy in a fundamentally equal platform as everyone else? What are those? What are those platforms that exist or don't exist? And what can we then do to change them? But just when I was doing the show in Portugal, for instance, I know it's a very different context. And people are like, oh, Portugal is so socialist. It's really not. So as we were making the show, we understood that it was like, oh, I'm not going through a migration process in Portugal. So we brought in people who are actually going through a migration process in Portugal. And two of them, artists, beautiful voices, gorgeous, love them. They sang so beautifully in the show. Who are migrants of color, also transgender, and don't have papers. It's like these people they have to pay their taxes because they work, but they don't have legal recognition, and so they can't vote, they can't participate publicly in things like everyone else does. Even them kind of renting a place or getting a mobile phone is fucking tricky. It takes months for them to do that because they have to go through so many fucking legal routes. It's like that is such a clear example of discrepancies and inequalities within our communities. Because it's like, until what would happen if in the UK right now everyone that lives here actually had access to democracy? What would happen? Because they don't. You have millions of people in the UK who don't have access to democracy. Last year, I was lucky enough to go through a process of naturalization. So I'm dual citizenship now, dual citizen now, and it's the first time I'm going to be allowed to vote. And I'm someone with a lot of privileges, but I was only able to do that after paying thousands of pounds and being here for 16 years. Like, there's people who've been here for their lifetimes and still can't vote. They still can't participate in democracy. They still can't run for office. You know what I mean? They still can't rent properly, even though they run their own businesses. Because they don't have access to that. That's fundamentally fucked up. That's not a function of democracy. You know what I mean? There's many other problems, of course, but once we start to tackle these things on a local level and the understanding that these things happen, maybe we'll have a bit more of a equal society and a less hateful society, because we do.
And I think on that note, we'll sort of round things up there, but I think,
try and shut me up, are you?
I would never try and do that. But no, in all seriousness, thank you for your time. And I think what you've done for me, and I'm sure for the people listening to this now, is I think you've made us think beyond ourselves. I think that's always important to do. I think you've also agitated us, actually. And I think that's the important thing. And you're like, what can we do as individuals, as collectives, as groups, as communities to push for systematic change, actually? We've got lots to do. And actually, I think you've also inspired me and equally other people in terms of the work you do to such a high standard. So you're always thinking about other people's and that's what makes you an admirable individual. So
thanks, Bill. Likewise.
Thank you.
From the work that I've seen you doing and your tenacity for supporting everyone and fighting for what's right, it's always been very inspiring.
Thank you. But if people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go to? What do you want people to follow you on the socials? Tell us more about that.
Well, thanks for reminding me. I need to update my website. I do actually. So my website is XAV. Oh, how do I say in English? XavierDeSouza.co.uk. And my socials are Zavinisms on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah, that's it.
And I'll put that in the
Yeah.
episode guide as well,
Okay.
so don't worry, people, you'll be able to follow the legend that is XAV. So
Oh, thanks, pal.
yeah, and on that we will leave it there. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. See you later.
What a treat.
In the Rainbow Spotlight today, we have a very, very special man from one of my favourite organisations, and that organisation is Yorkshire MESMAC. Now, Yorkshire MESMAC is one of the oldest and largest sexual health organisations in the country. They offer services to various communities across Yorkshire, including men who have sex with men, people of colour and other marginalised communities, people misusing drugs, sex workers, and LGBT young people and adults. Tom Doyle, CEO of Yorkshire MESMAC, welcome to Rainbow Conversations.
Hello, thanks for having me, Richard. It's lovely to be here.
Thank you very much. Tom, would you just like to explain in a little bit more detail about who Yorkshire MESMAC are and the work that you carry out?
Sure. Well, as you said, we're one of the oldest sexual health organisations in the country. We were set up 30 years ago as a Pathfinder project at the height of the HIV epidemic, working really with, at that time, with gay men, bisexual men, and other men who have sex with men. But over the years, our work's expanded. So we don't just do HIV prevention, we also do social support for people who are living with HIV. We run mental health services, a counselling service. We do a lot of group development. That's about trying to build community infrastructure following our community development ethos. So over the years, we've established probably over 50 different groups which is really about trying to get people together, reflect on common concerns and take collective action to meet that. And that can be anything really. I mean, the first group I set up when I was a community development worker with the organisation was an LGBT theatre group about 30 years ago called Latex Productions, and that was a fabulous group. We also, we run peer support groups for all sorts of communities, from Black trans folk to disabled people. So we've got a whole range of services.
And how important is it, particularly around those peer support groups that you do run for many of those marginalised communities you mentioned, how important are those groups even now, still today, when people might think we have a more accepting society? How important do those groups play and why?
It's massive. It's massive for me. It's fundamental to what I'm about and what the organisation's about. We believe that people are experts in their own lives, and that if we can harness people's skills, help them get the resources they need and the skills that need, they've got the real experience to design fantastic services and groups to support one another. What we really don't want anymore, or we haven't wanted for a long time, is prescribed lists of needs and solutions from people outside of communities. Communities know what the problems are, and given a bit of support, are able to get really creative solutions to meet those problems.
And in terms of those problems faced by the communities that you work with, what would those communities say right now are the really big issues facing them?
Obviously, COVID has disproportionately affected marginalised communities in all sorts of different ways. So, I mean, I'm always saying COVID hasn't caused inequality. What it's done is highlighted it and put a spotlight on it, and probably deepened inequalities. But those people who are facing health inequalities before COVID has exacerbated that. So, for example, older LGBT folk, less likely to have a family, less likely to have children. So if they get poorly or whatever, far more likely to be isolated and not have access to services. So we work really hard to get additional resources in, so that we're able to give tablets with data allowances on those, so people were able to keep in touch we're able to still come to groups as well virtually. In terms of other groups, I mean, generally we've seen a real spike in hate crime, and that's particularly faced by our trans siblings. That's been really a real difficulty. I think COVID also is storing up a lot of problems for us. With all the best will in the world, even during COVID, people going out and having sex. We know that, but services were harder to access. Our clinical colleagues are overwhelmed, so people find it harder to get into services. So I think we're going to see a spike in STIs and HIV and teenage pregnancies, that sort of thing. And I think, just like everyone else, our marginalised communities are facing a kind of an epidemic of mental health, kind of, which has been compounded by COVID.
And I suppose, in terms of agitations to sort of decision makers across the spectrum, what should those decision makers be doing locally, regionally, and nationally in order to better support the communities that you're representing in your services?
I think what's essential is to get people to think out of the box a little bit, and I think some commissioners do that really well. And I think Bradford Council has been really good on this. I'm not just saying that because you're a member of Bradford Council, but in terms of, for example, a COVID support plan for someone who's white middle class and all the rest of it looks very different to someone who might be a street drinker, for example. How do you support a street drinker who's got a positive COVID result stopping at home when they've got COVID? Well, the thing you do is you buy them alcohol so they can stop in the house, and that's, from a public health perspective, in the short term, that's a really bad thing to do. But in this kind of in this epidemic that we've got, I think it's really important that we do think like that. And I don't think statutory public health services can necessarily do that, and that's where organisations like ours and other, like Stella Trust and whatever, can help, because if they give us the money, and we can go and do that, and that doesn't go against our thinking at all.
So perhaps one last question is, in terms of moving forward for Yorkshire MESMAC in the next year or so, what can people sort of expect? What are your plans, etc., going forward?
Kind of nearest plan, I don't know if you know that there's not really a plan for National HIV Testing Week this year, which is a real shame because it's something that we helped set up originally. But I think we've taken the decision that there'll be a Yorkshire Testing Week this year, last week of November. So we're looking at a Yorkshire-wide testing offer for HIV. I think the working title is Testing Tykes at the minute, but it might not be called that. So that's kind of, I think, taking up a lot of our thinking. I think the big kind of wider strategic move is a very much more badging ourselves more as a public health charity. I think a lot of people see us as a sexual health charity, but I think our mental health services I think need to be pushed a little bit higher up the agenda, and we're investing some of our charitable reserves in helping us do that and get a little bit more high profile in our mental health work. So that's going to be really important. And the other thing is that we think it's really important, because we work with most marginalised people, that once they're in front of us, we can do as much as we possibly can with them. So we do really want to make every contact count. So, if we've got, an African queer woman who's never accessed services, we want to be able to talk to her about a mental health, about her smoking, about her drinking, about weight, about all those other determinants of health that are wider than just, say, sexual health or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And just to sort of round off by saying a thank you, really, because as somebody who's seen firsthand the work that you do in supporting marginalised communities across Yorkshire and all different types of communities, in fact, I don't think we can underestimate how important the work you do as an organisation is. And I think if anybody is out there looking for some support in the areas that Thomas set out in this segment, how can people find out more about Yorkshire MESMAC, and more importantly, how do they get in contact with you if they need some support?
Sure. Well, one of the things we're really good at is our online presence. So we have a fantastic website where people can self-refer, they can book appointments directly online and all the rest of it. Our website is www.mesmac.co.uk. If you don't like using the internet, if you do go online to our website, all our officers' numbers are there and each individual worker's mobiles are there, so you can contact the worker that is most appropriate for you in your geographical area or the area that you're interested in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Tom. Everybody, that was Tom Doyle, CEO of Yorkshire MESMAC. Wow, what an episode that was. Thank you so much to Xav and to Tom for their amazing, inspired contributions there. I'm sure they give us all a lot to think about. Now, if you want to keep up to date with what Xav is doing and with what Yorkshire-based MESMAC are doing, please do check out their socials and their website details in the episode bio. And if you want to keep up to date with Rainbow Conversations, you can follow me on Instagram at Rainbow Conversations and on Twitter at Rainbow Convos. Up to you next time, people. All best. Bye.